Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, in this day and age, it's so important to be aware of what's going on just beneath the surface. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And I mean, if you like how we do things, because, you know, we just like to do things light and easy, you can subscribe to the podcast. I mean, you're halfway there. You're listening to us right now. But you can find us on Apple, on Spotify, on Google, Amazon, basically wherever you find your podcasts. And also you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. Also, it would be fantastic if you would follow us on social media. You can do that over at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I dare say most importantly, would you please pay us a visit over at intheseats.ca, where we talk about television, film, basically the moving image at large. Anything under the sun that we can watch and get our hands on is all good by us, because we love talking about it and we love it when you read about it. So please come by and pay us a visit, because we would really appreciate it. This episode, we got a good one. We're doing more Hot Docs coverage, which kicks off this April 29th and runs until the following weekend, May 9th. And it's there's so many good films. It's all online, Canada-wide. I do recommend, if you have any interest in documentary film or film in general, there's a lot of fascinating stories out there that I do recommend you check out. And on this one, we're jumping into a world premiere of a film called Zo Reken, which takes us to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, where even 11 years after that horrible earthquake, people are still struggling, and there's so many problems. And the film puts us inside a truck, or the slang of the slang that they call a Zo Reken, of a big one of those big powerful trucks that zooms through the city and takes humanitarian workers from place to place. And we as they stop, we get to see people on the street talking, and we get to see people on the street sort of discussing, framed around this beast of a vehicle, which, you know, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people in these places that are suffering and having real problems. And it's a fascinating little sort of slice on seeing people sort of gather in squares and sort of talk about their problems and talk about what's going on in the world and what they can and what they can't do about it. It's a little heartbreaking, but it's really also fascinating to watch as we see these people on the streets sort of discussing their real world problems, which aren't always getting handled by the humanitarian aid because of various corruption reasons and God knows what. We had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with writer-director Emanuel Licha about this film, and it's one that you have to see. It really puts this very artistic frame on some very real-world stuff that's going on, and like I said, it is one of the many fantastic films that is going on at Hot Docs right now, and I do recommend, if you get a chance, to check this out and check anything out. But I mean, more importantly, listen with our talk with Emmanuel right now, because I enjoyed the hell out of it, and it's a good one. So hope you enjoy it. But I mean, I was so struck by the film, and just really by sort of the visual, like sort of almost the subversion of power, I think maybe is sort of the best way to describe it, just in terms of the use of being inside the car and just having this sort of safe environment, which I can imagine from an outward standpoint is either a good thing or a very, very bad thing, depending on sort of the moment or the time. Can you walk me through sort of, I guess, your inspiration for the film?
Yes, sure. I mean, an important part of that, deciding to use this 4x4 truck comes from personal experience, something that happened more than 30 years ago, before being a filmmaker, even before studying art, visual arts. I was a geographer believe it or not. I was a graduate student, at least in geography, and I was planning to do a career in geography, probably in international cooperation. And I was lucky, very early on, I got the chance to work in a West African country for my master's degree. So, very candidly, very naively, full of hopes and good willing, I went there. And actually, the first day I arrived was already a shock. I was welcomed by the chief of the team in his huge, what seemed to me a huge 4x4 truck. And he took me along and we had a ride. It was the end of the rainy season. And so the roads were really bad. They were glued, but still we could, really drive fast on those roads and feel really powerful. And he was laughing, and I thought, what am I doing here? That's not what I expected, being so quickly in this position of privilege, only because of the fact that I was a white in a country of Black people. So that really was a big shock. I did continue my master's degree, spent a few months there, and a few more adventures like that happened. But very quickly, I understood that was not for me, that I felt really awkward being in this position of privilege. And it is probably the reason why I didn't make a career in geography. So 30 years later, this moment and those different moments during this time I spent in that country were on my mind. And I was trying to find a way to come back to it, to come back to this contradiction that is still very much active, very much happening 30 years later. Nothing much has changed. But I was trying to find a way, or more specifically, an object, a spatial object, and this is what my films are usually about: spatial objects that are connected to some kind of power. And it was very easy for me to come back to this truck. And being in Montreal and having those very close links to Haiti, there are many Haitians in Montreal. Those connections are easy, if I can say so. And since the fact that since 2010, the country is called the Republic of NGOs, since there are so many of them over there, it's just incredible. The first time I went to prepare the film back in 2017, only at the airport there were loads of young missionaries, all with different T-shirts with different colors, just coming to help the country and just ignoring the amount of money they were spending just to be there. So, and as soon as I arrived, it became clear that this object was the most visible, the most emblematic symbol of that presence. They were, you just have to look at what ministries of foreign affairs suggest. They all say, stay in your car, roll up your windows, just move from your house and go somewhere in your car. And so that's what happened with white people. They are mostly either in their house, in their offices, or in between they are in those cars, which are kind of bubbles, very much protected. But again, what is for me extremely interesting with this object, as other objects I've dealt with in my other films, is that it's a very complex object, because it's a space of aid. People need those objects, those trucks, to go in places that are very, remote. They are strong, so they can carry equipment, medicine, etc. So they are very useful. But at the same time, they are those objects of power. And that was something that I discovered, which gave another layer to the film, to the project, is that politicians in Haiti have observed that humanitarian aid organizations used those trucks that they imported, and they said, "Oh, what a good idea! It looks very powerful." And after them, policemen started using, and the henchmen of Jovenel Moïse are nowadays using those trucks, those Zo Reken, as they call them in Haiti, to fire on the people, so to terrorize the people. So it's a very, for me, it's a fascinating object. It's both a useful object, a good object, and it can, as any object you will probably argue, but it can become a very mean and very dangerous, at least an object of power for sure.
Well, I mean, and that speaks to its nickname as well, which I mean, I just kind of love, because on one end, a shark can be a terrifying thing, but if you've got a shark on your side, then it's a fantastic thing. And I mean, can you talk a little bit about just sort of, I guess, having boots on the ground and getting people to sort of not just have this place to talk, which sort of, and throw ideas back and forth, which is obviously a difficult thing in Haiti, but sort of doing it inside this space, which is really almost contradictory to sort of the idea that they want to sort of talk about and get across. Because I mean, I can imagine a white man on the ground trying to convince a bunch of people to get into a truck to talk about these things. It can be at least an interesting sort of challenge.
It is. You are absolutely right. And the film and my position is full of contradictions from the beginning. And I think this film will be, I hope, useful to talk about those contradictions, mine or other white people's contradictions. So from the beginning, as you said, using that object, which is the symbol of power and of violence, to make the film is problematic. And of course, as soon as we appear in this truck, and as soon as Haitians are invited in the truck, they are part of this environment, of this identification to power. And it's not about ignoring it and saying, no, we are only coming to do good things here. I mean, we are in this position of power. As soon as we make a film, it's a very complex and fascinating questions for any kind of film, but especially in this situation where the team was not completely, but in great parts white. I am white. The DOP was white. The sound engineer is white. But we had, of course, Asian collaborators. But still, we would appear in this car and be identified with the humanitarian aid organizations or any white people coming to the country for any kind of reasons. So we worked hard to try to reverse that. Of course, we didn't completely succeed, but ways that we had to do that was, for example, we put a sign on the truck, a big sign indicating what we were doing, so people could read that we were dressing. So it was a sign in Creole saying that we were doing this documentary on Zo Reken. If they wanted to participate, they could call a number or write an email to an email address, and some people did. So those are, it's a part of the people you see, the characters you see in the film are people that contacted us when they met us, when we were in the streets, and they called us. For example, other people were invited. So we did a long preparation in advance. I had the chance to have here in Montreal Asian collaborator, Rodney Sirius, who is a professor of sociology at the Université d'État d'Haïti, but luckily for me, doing his PhD in Montreal. So we could, and has, a lot of contacts in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince. So we from Montreal, we did contact a lot of people that we wanted to have in the truck to invite, because we knew they had something interesting and important to say. So those are one part of the guests we had, but it was still important to keep the truck open and to do this critique from this very symbol of power. So in a way to an attempt, I say an attempt because of course it could not succeed completely, but an attempt to decolonize that object of power. So to reverse it, excluding humanitarian aid workers, only welcoming Haitians living in Port-au-Prince, and who were told that what was our aim was to question that truck. And then they were the ones choosing where we would go. So they were the one directing us, actually. So we asked them, what is it that you want to show us in the city? Is there someone you want to meet, someone you want to talk to? So that was our way of finding a ground of the lesser, if I can say so, the lesser contradiction, a way of flipping that object, of decolonizing it.
Well, no, and I think that was effective because, I mean, especially in the beginning of the film, I mean, there's obviously going to be moments where you can feel that you are at least sort of directing the narrative and trying to figure out where everything's going to go. But then there is this larger sequence by the end of the film where there is a crowd around the truck, and it almost feels like you were able to step back a bit and just sort of observe. And I'm kind of curious, was that organic? Did you put everything together sort of chronologically, or was that something that sort of you had to sort of try to put together to sort of create a larger scene like that?
This scene is very interesting because when we were there, that was the end of November. As you know, the situation was really bad. It is still very bad, but at that time, the country was experiencing what they call the pays lock, so everything was closed. It was a kind of pre-pandemic situation. The shops were closed, schools were closed. There were checkpoints and barricades all over the city, so it was extremely difficult to go around the city, just to move around. That's something that you see in the film, which is real. This feeling that the viewer has, that we don't know where we're going, is true. We didn't know where we were going, and it was certainly impossible to plan any kind of trip. So that last scene where people are seen gathering around two characters, which is the one that we see in the film, which is the driver. We see him from the very beginning, Pascal Antoine, who, by the way, is not the real driver, who is in a way an actor in the film. He's doing this thing for the film. And the other one, so sitting in the truck, is Rodney Sirius, this collaborator on the film, who traveled with us to Port-au-Prince. So I had complete confidence in them, and they just managed that scene. What we were supposed to do on that day was it was towards the end of our stay, and we wanted to gather all the guests that we had invited in the film during the shooting, to make a kind of farewell party, to say thank you for having participated, and all was organized. We found a place, etc. It sounded very good. We had bought the food, the drinks, but on that day it was a very, very difficult day for Port-au-Prince. The army had started to dismantle the barricades, and people were reacting very violently. The night before, we heard gunshots the whole night. So it was really totally impossible to reach the place we had booked, and for guests to come. And so we had met. We were living in a kind of pension, and our neighbors had already participated in the film. They had welcomed us to have this moment that you see at the very beginning with the musicians. So that was in their courtyard, and they were very interested in what was happening, what we were doing, and questioning us. And so I was, from that moment, trying to imagine how I could include them in the film somehow. One of them traveled with us, and then the idea came from someone in the team that, oh, maybe we could transfer the party just in our street with our neighbors. So that's what we did. We only, had a few drinks, and people started to come from not only the neighbors, but right beside us, but all other people from the rest of the neighborhood started to gather, to come. And Haitians have this. This is something I observed very often, that they have this habit of meeting, for example, in parks and discussing politics. So you see sometimes when you walk in Port-au-Prince, large gatherings, spontaneous gatherings of people quarreling, discussing, a real political debate, very democratic way of exchanging right in the street. So for them, it was very easy to connect to that situation. And as you said, I only had to step back and observe that, and the whole scene just took shape in front of my eyes. And I think it's a beautiful. It was a beautiful moment, and I think it's a beautiful scene that happened, and that we brought to the end of the film too.
No, and I mean, you're absolutely right, and it just makes me think about. I mean, you mentioned this earlier about how so many of your films are based around sort of an object and having sort of this space that you're existing in. And I'm kind of curious, because seeing the film, like, I wonder if, like, without the totem, if that's the right word, of the Zo Reken, this feels like it would have been a very different film. And I'm kind of curious, like, do you think you could have even made the film without sort of the confines of the truck? Because, like, just when I think about it, it feels like it would have been two different films, inside the truck or outside the truck.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even ask myself this question, because from the very beginning, the point of departure of the film, from the very first lines I wrote for that project, were based on the truck. It was not at the beginning a film on Haiti. It was clearly a film on the truck. The initial title was even 4x4. So it was clearly dealing with that object. And as much as Haiti become kind of obvious choice, it was, for me, in my mind, a kind of an example of a place where those trucks are used. But it was certainly not as much a film on Haiti as what it became, because, as I said, the situation in Haiti was, when we were there, was so strong, so difficult, so important in what people had to say, that the film during the shooting became more and more about Haiti. But the initial idea for me was not to make a film on Haiti. I'm not Haitian. I don't have any meaningful past with that country. How could I allow myself to think of making a film on Haiti? It was really starting from this very intimate experience of that truck, and wanting to find a relevant environment, a relevant country to unpack this subject that Haiti came. But as I said, as soon as, in the first days of the shooting in Haiti, I understood that the country would invade the truck, would invade my idea, and it almost took over my idea. Some people, when I sent the project for funding, some people said, "Oh, it's too conceptual. You will be stuck in a truck. What can you do out of that?" So people were skeptical. So maybe they were right, but it was impossible for me to imagine at that time, when I was writing, that the force and the power of what people had to say, and the way they would take over my project almost. It became that film on Haiti, but without me planning it almost.
It really feels like sort of the universal aspect of this film is that it's basically a road movie. And when you're in the car on the road, you talk. And I mean, I think that's the one thing that, I mean, is almost a big part of the world's ills, is that we just don't necessarily talk enough to sort of sort out our problems, no matter what they be. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, as this movie gets out there to more and more audiences, what do you hope sort of the audience pull away is from your film?
Well, I hope they will. I mean, it depends which audience. when we make film as filmmakers, we have a kind of the typical spectator in mind, who will get out the most of what we're trying to do. In my mind, this film is aimed at white people. I'm saying that because you hear in the film people outside the truck insulting us. We kept it in the editing, not to say that people are violent or insulting, but to say that they're right. I think they were right to be angry at us and angry to see this privilege passing in front of their eyes. So we kept it in the film as much as we kept comments from some of our guests, including Lionel Trouillot, a very important writer who says, who addresses the driver and says, aren't you tired of driving for white people who pretend that they like the country and to just go away? And he was asking him, and looking at us, looking at me. So of course it was a question addressed to me, and we kept it in the film because I think those questions are important. So I hope the white spectators will have the same, will ask him and herself the same question that I asked myself. What are we doing there? Let's listen to the people. They don't want international organizations playing in their affairs. Myrta Gilbert, says what Asian people want is to deal with their own business. So I hope this film will trigger, it's an important discussion that is, nowadays taking place. And I hope very modestly that this film will participate in this discussion. As far as a Haitian spectator will take out of that, I hope that they will see the film as a proof or a way of mentioning that they have allies, that they can count on some allies to go on with their project of decolonization. So those are my hopes for the film.
No, and I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think your film really does show that very well. Sort of the difference between white people going there and pretending to help and imposing on, outside values on them versus actually trying to help them help themselves in terms of doing the things that they want to do. And I think this film really does show that beautifully. And just congratulations again on a great film, and thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you so much, David.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.